Well, hello everyone. It's John Lockland here. Welcome to this week's forum. Delighted to see my co-host Peter Lavelle is online. We'll soon be joined by our other co-host Jeremy Nell. And indeed, this week we're traveling to South Africa, where our guest is Joost Strydom. Joost, you're the spokesman for Orania. Orania is, as I understand it, a new settlement, a new town created to allow Afrikaners to live in peace and live their lives as they have for centuries. Perhaps you could tell us how it came about, and then, of course, also give us the background, the general political background in South Africa that led to this adventure. Joost.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's I would keep you busy all night long if I have to answer all those questions. It's quite a long and nuanced and complicated history, but it can be shortened. But if we shorten it a bit, it's necessary to start with certain, shall we say, assumptions or things that we agree on as starting facts. One of those would be that the Afrikaner are a people upon themselves. They are a folk or a people in own right, and with that comes certain realities. We have a long and complex history here in Southern Africa, but we became a folk here. We became a people here. With our own origin story and a lot of developments and many things happening. It is also the case that we continuously, through our history, strive towards freedom, whether that be the Vryburgers, which was the first farmers to move out of the Dutch Indian Company's territory and start farming, whether that be the French Huguenots who left France from Catholic oppression and came to the Cape, whether that be moving inland away from British rule, or whether that be fighting and so on, local tribes in South Africa, and also later on, again, wars with the British and so on. Our strive was always towards freedom. So if we can make those two starting points, the Afrikaner are a people upon themselves, and they are freedom-loving people. Then a lot of the complex history of the Afrikaner can be simplified to an extent. And then the next thing that we must speak about is our more recent history, where the international world declared us the lowest level dirt of the world, sanctioned and everything, and where we've had to find a new solution. John, you referred to the political realities in South Africa that led to the creation of Orania. I want to comment on that and say that yes, there were certain political things that obviously we reacted on, but Orania is an idea in own right. And I can say this because the first mentions of what would later become Orania already started in 1952 under the lead of an intellectual think tank called SABRA, the South African Bureau of Racial Affairs. And they said Afrikaners must group together, demographically focus on one geographical space, and in that, build their own institutions on their own land and do their own labor, which is the founding principles of Orania. So it's important to state also that Orania is an idea in itself. It's not really reactionary. It's rather a proactive idea. As I said, the earliest documents that I have is from the 50s, but there are some major movements in that direction in the late 70s, early 80s, and the Orania movement in its current form founded in 1988. So more proactive than reactive.
And why did it start in the 1950s?
I mean, but also, what are the origins? Why was this important? And what was the opinion of the South African government? Because this is it sounds like self-reliance, creating a community. Well, you don't do those things unless you feel there is a threat to both.
Absolutely right, and that threat is called demographics. I don't think the Afrikaners' primary concern or our primary threat is political, economical, or anything else. I think it's a demographic threat. To be a minority in your own country is an extremely scary thing. So Afrikaners had minority rule, but after that minority rule was ended, we lost everything. We lost all political power, all military, all economic power, and we were reduced to just a minority, and not a very big minority. although we are a people in own right, we were seen as just a minority. And so the problem that Orania wants to solve is not a political problem. It's not even a military problem. It's a demographic thing. So in order to build a future, we must concentrate our demographic numbers in a geographical space. And we chose an area in a semi-desert area, an area that is the most scarcely populated part of South Africa, the Karoo region, an area that no one else basically wants. And we started to focus there because we can, in numbers, settle here and become a majority in our own area. And if you're a majority, you can make decisions for yourself. And that was the reason. So the threat, I think, is a demographic threat. We are being overwhelmed demographically, and demographics is destiny.
Can I just quickly jump in here for John and Peter? Yes, nice to chat to you again. There will always be confusion, though, between the word Afrikaner and the word Boer. There was the Anglo-Boer War, not the Anglo-Afrikaner War. What's the difference, Joost?
Well, it depends on who you ask. If you ask me, I will say it's two terms for the same thing. If you look at some of the heroes from the Anglo-Boer War, like or the rebellion that followed on that, Joopie Fourie, General Christian de Wet, some of the Boer heroes, they called themselves Afrikaners as well. I don't think that's really a legitimate debate. I'm still reading on that and so on. I'm open to different conventions. I view myself as both. I think it's different names that we got in different stages. Afrikaner more in the Afrikaner nationalist stage of our history, while Boer definitely more in the Anglo-Boer War, in the Great Trek, and so on. There was a time in our history where we just referred to ourselves as Christians. So there are names, but it's more about the value system that goes with it. So yes, I think yes, it was the Anglo-Boer War. I'm proud. I would identify myself definitely as a Boer as well, but I don't think the debate is really worth the airtime it's getting.
But Boer is just farmer, right? Even in Afrikaner.
Yeah, the mistake you're making is to say it is just farmer.
Boer I mean the word means farmer, right?
Yeah, no, you're correct. You're 100% correct. It's just tongue in the cheek. We obviously have a very sentimental affection for the word Boer, even though some of our fellow countrymen use it as an insult. We see the word Boer actually as a compliment. It is a word that's associated with independence, rugged existence in the open fields. And if you spell it with a capital B, it's also a value system. It's also a religious system, a Christian religion. So yeah, we're very proud to be called Boer.
Okay, well, there's over the last couple of years, in Western mainstream media, you can get radically different interpretations of what's going on in South Africa, and that's why I asked Jerm if we could do this, because why should, if my numbers are wrong, please forgive me. Why should 7% of the population own 70% of the land? Okay, this is this progressiveness that you hear in the United States. By definition, people like you are white supremacists. Can deal with some of those things here, because I don't have a great depth in knowledge of South Africa, but when you talk about communities, that seems like an equalization, even though your demographics are not the same. Meaning, why can't all communities have the same kind of equal stake in creating a future for themselves? That kind of argument progressives in the West don't like.
So there's many things to comment on that, but I will start with something important, and that is how skewed that number is that is being used as propaganda around the world, especially in legacy mainstream liberal media. It is untrue. Or let me put it this way, the study is skewed for a very simple reason. The population of commercial farmers owning individual land, could be that 7% own 70%. However, the difference between the native black interpretation of property rights and the modern Western, more white-viewed interpretation of property rights is very different. So all the old black tribal lands, which is millions of hectares in South Africa, including the Inkonyama Trust of the Zulus, including many other things, the Xhosas areas and so on, those are all a combination of communal land with private areas. So what they would do is the chief holds the title, or the king holds the title for the entire area, and he allocates space for his people. But it's very, very, very large pieces of land. So that millions and millions of hectares are not counted in that land audit. The only thing that is counted is individual title deeds, which is more the Western approach to property rights, right? So if you only count that, you will only see something that reflects Western, not necessarily only Afrikaners, but white people's land ownership. While if you include the 20% of land in South Africa that the government owns, which the government is black, right, primarily, and all the tribal lands, that looks totally different. So what's Orania's standpoint? Well, very easy. I started with the assumption that we are a people upon themselves, and there's always a connection between people and land and earth, right? So if you agree that we are a nation, a people, then you must also look at our history where we had two republics, which was ours, taken away from us after the war with the British. But also you must understand that all the individually held title deeds in South Africa is not the land of the Afrikaners as a people. It's individual places of individual people, and it can be taken away either by their banks if they are, default back on the debt that they have on those title deeds, or they could sell it, they could give it away, they could immigrate. It's not ours as a people, it's individuals that owns it. While the black areas, they own it collectively. It can't be taken away from them on an individual basis. If your family owns that part, then you always can return to that area. And that's a major difference in understanding. So we don't really, the only place that we have is Orania, right? That we have collectively. All of the rest is individual. And that's a very important distinction to make. And that's why Orania projects the idea of communal land also for Afrikaners as a possible solution to a lot of the friction in South Africa.
And Orania is what exactly? A city, a large area with farmland around it? Perhaps you could just explain exactly what it is, because you've just been talking about farming. And
what is the attitude of the South African government to
it? Say again, please.
And following up on John's question, what is the South African government's attitude towards you?
Well, okay, the South African government's attitudes towards Orania is whatever fits them at that stage. But Orania itself is what I would describe as a town or a community. It's inhabited by about 3,000 people currently. It stretches over an area of about 14,000 hectares, of which a small space is very developed urbanly, while a large chunk of it is rural area. But it's also an idea, the idea that the combination of land, institutions, and labor can be the key towards freedom and self-sufficiency. So the Orania idea is one part of Orania, and the Orania reality another. And then in regards to the government attitude towards Orania, it's very interesting that they use Orania as a way as a whip against Afrikaners many times. If they want to attack Afrikaners, they use Orania as kind of the method to do it. They have threatened us, and they have tried to negotiate with us many times. So it depends on the political season in South Africa, especially before elections. Orania becomes a play ball where political parties see who can make the worst threats against us in order to score political points and to satisfy their voter base. So that is that. So Orania developed in a piece of desert. We bought a ghost town back in 1991. And since then, we've had a steady growth rate for the past about 8 years of more than 10% per year on average in population, people moving here. We have built institutions. In South Africa, we have something that we call load shedding, which is rolling blackouts. The national energy provider can't sustain the electrical grid for the entirety of South Africa, so your power gets switched off. We are about 50% energy independent. We've built a college, 2 high schools, safety and security network, and so on. Some of the things that we built on the area that we have.
Can I just jump in here and just add that although the town of Orania is quite small, it's very much viewed as a heart, a center point of Afrikanerdom in South Africa. I mean, there are a few million Afrikaners, but they're scattered across the country, which of course, where Trump's executive order might become important in this conversation. I saw a great comment now. Someone saying, "Is it a hippie town?" I can tell you right now, it is the opposite of a hippie town.
I would well imagine. I somehow feel I would be welcome there.
We like flowers, but we're not so big on the drugs. And the left-leaning politics is also not so popular.
What is the attitude of other Afrikaners? I mean, obviously, like you said, this is a very small scale at this point. What is the attitude towards Orania?
It changed a lot over the years. In the beginning, they were very skeptic. I mean, if you can't see the vision of the founding fathers of Orania, it seems like people are running away into the desert in one of the most inhospitable parts of South Africa with no economy, with no institutions. It looks like you're surrendering. I would much rather think of this as a strategic retreat because of the fact that we are such a small demographic minority. You need to concentrate in one place. So many people couldn't see that vision. Now Orania is starting to become more and more successful, claiming a lot of headlines around the country and around the world. I can tell you we have currently three international media teams in Orania, German, Swedish, and Greek media here in the town. So it's capturing the attention of people because of the fact that a lot of things is happening. We're building institutions and so on, grabbing the imagination of many Afrikaners. So I think a lot of Afrikaners went from not so positive about it to supporting it, although there are still challenges. Orania is still a pioneer community. It's not necessarily easy. It's a tough life out here sometimes. You must fully buy into the idea of Orania also with own labor. So while in South Africa the usage of cheap black labor is still very much the reality, in Orania we only use Afrikaner labor. We do all our work ourselves. It might sound strange to someone in Europe where it might be more the norm, but in South Africa it's not the norm. So whoever is doing all the work, if you're importing foreigners to do your work, you will always be a minority in your own area. We do all our own work, which is revolutionary in South Africa. It's not something normal. If you toured South Africa, you will see the effects of labor. The British even mentioned it back during the Anglo-Boer War. They saw that labor is a big issue in South Africa. So also the idea of letting go of the comfort of the nice lifestyle that comes with cheap black labor is also, but a lot of Afrikaners are still not ready for that. But the attitude definitely shifted as Orania is building and as South Africa is failing in many regards.
Peter, to jump into a comment you made earlier. Sorry I know I'm hogging things here.
No.
No. I think you should be driving anyway.
You should be driving anyway, Jerm, because you're much closer to this than we are. We're thousands of miles away.
Peter, you made a joke earlier about the white supremacist thing. I want to point out something because people struggle with this dichotomy. To love your own doesn't mean you hate another.
Yeah, I know.
If that makes sense.
Well, I mean, what I get in South Africa is not every morning the headline, okay, for in my world, okay. But what I do get is black farmer. The entire agricultural system is tilted in the direction of a small minority of white farmers. They're fabulously rich. Black agriculture is hindered because of X, Y, and Z, which I never understand. And then the other side, okay. Well, last night 3 more Afrikaner farmers were murdered. Okay, this is why I wanted Jerm to do this. I mean, I get the only news I really get is extremes about South Africa.
Perhaps Joost, you could comment on that. I mean, obviously the whole expropriation of land business, which went on in Zimbabwe for more than 10 years, as I recall, seems to have now started up in South Africa as well. And of course, has led to these sanctions coming from America. Perhaps you could talk to us about that.
Well, I think it's one of the issues that the American government is using currently to impose these possible sanctions. I think larger geopolitics is much more the reason for such things. But I think the perspectives on South Africa will always be extreme, to extreme edges. Why? Because the worldview in South Africa is so extremely different. On the one hand, you have the South African black population with a different narrative about history, a different narrative about religion, about legal systems, and so on. And then you've got the Afrikaner and white English-speaking South Africans, and so on, with a more Western perspective on it. And obviously, people take their own side. It's the logical thing to do, but the two narratives clash to an extent that there's a lot of friction, and there's always reporting from the one side or from the other side. Obviously, I'm going to pick my own side. I'm going to, give the perspective from my own people. Did the ANC in the past 35 years, after they gotten power in South Africa, did they achieve much for the upliftment of their people, the empowerment of their people? No, they've been corrupt to an extent that I can't even explain. It would take me days. How they broke down public infrastructure that was built under the previous regime, including electricity, including the military, including the economy, including many other things, and without uplifting their own people, without taking responsibility for their people. The elected leaders in South Africa are mostly black South Africans. The amount of corruption and destruction in South Africa is extreme. The amount of violence is extreme. We have a constitution that's supposed to guarantee the safety of people. They would write things in the constitution like the right to good housing, human dignity in housing, right to access to clean water, right to safety, but they can't deliver on those promises. It's easy to write in. I can write in, a constitution and write you have the right to live forever. I can't promise it, so it doesn't mean anything. On the other hand,
I understand South Africa is one of the richest countries in the world
in terms of minerals.
Yeah.
Diamonds and gold.
Yeah, well, we are quickly making China one of the richest countries in the world by in a very corrupt way selling everything that's worthwhile to them. We can't transport it out of the country and the rest of Southern Africa fast enough. And who's getting rich? The government officials, not the people of South Africa. So that is a major thing. If we look at this from an Afrikaner perspective, we look at it from a way that we are denied our birthright of having our own piece of land. We had two republics not long ago, 115 years ago. We had two republics internationally recognized, where we could live in freedom. And if I want to put the Orania perspective on that, I can say that our perspective is freedom is to not be oppressed and simultaneously not oppressing anyone else. We don't have that ambition. We are not empire-minded people. We are people that want to protect our own and live our lives in freedom. So we are denied that, the things that we had. And simultaneously, there is 142 racial laws in South Africa, denying people on the basis of their skin color access to education, access to business, and more. 142 laws, and added to that many regulations in regards to BEE and things like that. We pushed out of the economy, pushed out of education, and so on. So our opportunities are less and less and less, while the crime and the corruption and so on gets worse and worse and deteriorates the situation in the country. So that is from Afrikaners' perspective. We are unsafe, we are unfree, and we don't have our own piece of land. Orania's answer is, well, the way to solve those problems is to concentrate in one place, build political power there, get recognition there, because if we are free, we are safe. If we are free, we can make economic decisions for ourselves. We can protect our culture and our religion. So that is our answer to that.
Can I jump in also again about the violence aspect? Peter, you won't believe it, but, and Joost, you can correct me if I've got my numbers a bit wrong, but I think since 1994, when the ANC took over, there have been over 4,000 white farmers murdered. And I think in 2022 alone, there were over 300 attacks on farmers and 50 killed just in 2022. There are a lot of white farmers. I think they're the majority and most likely Afrikaans. And to become a farmer is not just something you study for 3 years. It's generational. It's a serious. It's a calling in many ways. And so. My wife, for example, comes from just outside Pretoria, which is the capital, on the sort of the farm areas. Every single day at 7 in the evening, they do a two-way radio engagement with all the local farms, where they check in on one another to see if they're safe, because they've got their own security networks set up. Yeah. That's just normal life.
Well, a few years ago, I did a program on that, and I got so much blowback. Oh my God, I was just stunned by it. Okay, because the right to be safe, the right to your liberty. I mean, I didn't think these were controversial ideas, but when it's contextualized in South Africa, I see that it very much is. And again, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast with you gentlemen.
But Joost, in Orania, you are obviously not. It's not a unilateral declaration of independence like kind of Smith proclaimed. You're still living in the Republic of South Africa. Presumably, the police forces and the legal system of South Africa is what governs Orania. How does that work?
I think the short answer to that is there are many South Africas. The illusion that there's one rainbow nation centrally managed is untrue for multiple reasons. One, the diversity, people don't necessarily embrace that. Everyone sticks to their own culture. But more than that, the ability of the central state to manage the affairs, especially on the periphery, is not it's not to a very high degree. So if we can take, for example, I mean, some of the local black tribes, they just don't care who the president of the country is. They respect their king. Yeah. So let's look at it realistically. Orania is very far away. So one of the university lecturers always say Russia has two good generals, General Distance and General Cold. While Orania has also got two good generals, General Distance and General Own Labor. That keeps us safe, but it also gives us a large extent of internal political power here. So the state's ability, I mean, remember something, South Africa is as big as 16 European countries put together, or if they're the smaller countries, but including France and Germany. If you have to fathom the fact that 16 different countries, France, Germany, and so on, managed centrally, and then by incompetent government, all the different peoples, it's just not possible. So the English couldn't manage South Africa centrally, the Afrikaner failed, and now the ANC is failing miserably in terms of central management. So the reality of everyday life in rural areas is you can't expect the police to come if there's crime. The municipalities are dysfunctional and so on. So the ability to impose power upon people on the periphery is very, very low. And in that lies the secret of Orania, and that is our recipe. Our recipe is build de facto realities and then get de jure recognition later. So we built many realities. We built our own bank, we built our own energy system, and we hope to be energy independent not too long from now. We built schools and so on, tertiary college and so on, safety and security, because the police in the rural areas in South Africa is undermanned, understaffed, underfunded. The only thing over is overweight, but they are unable to look after. And remember, the police is two things. One is in terms of criminal activity. The other thing is it's a tool of the state to impose their will. It can become that, and then in South Africa it certainly is. So we've built our own safety and security networks, and it's actually the case that surrounding farms and even the South African police service call us for help. That happens more and more. So there's a de facto reality where we manage ourselves. But yes, our tax money still flows to the government. We have to pay tax, although we deliver all our own services, and everything we build is with our own funds. But we still have our tax money is still flowing out of Orania.
Orania also has its own cryptocurrency.
Say again?
Orania also has its own cryptocurrency for trading.
Yeah, it's not completely crypto, but it is a digital version of the Ora, which is very handy because it's in a closed circuit, which has got certain implications.
What is the success is often the result of a demonstration effect. And why haven't more Afrikaners moved to Orania? Is it? I mean, obviously there are two conflicting. Well, there's one idea about having the soil, having a connection to the land. You obviously in your endeavors are proving that, but then there are farmers, Afrikaner farmers, they don't want to give up their land, but it may eventually be taken away from them, and you could be the alternative. But I can understand if your family have owned a large tract of land for 5 generations, it has to be basically existential for you to finally give up. I mean, how is that kind of tension? Because I'm sure both the Afrikaner farmers and yourselves, you have mutual respect, but can you succeed separated, succeed
Yes.
without being united?
Yes, I think there are levels of success that is possible. So let me put it this way. Most people, and sad to say, including maybe a lot of Afrikaners, do not want freedom. They just want fair rulers. And that is the sad reality. We can see it in voting patterns all around the world. We can see it in the way people embrace being oppressed as long as things are going nicely in terms of service delivery and so on. Orania strives towards freedom, obviously. But let's think a bit about the reality of owning an area like Orania and being truly having it as ourselves, and then farmers in the rest of South Africa. Orania is an answer to many things. I will not force anyone to move here, as well as I will not take the right away from anyone who wants to be a refugee in the USA. Obviously, I believe in the Orania model. That's why I'm here, and I would encourage people to come here. Many close relatives to myself and many other Iranians and many friends of mine had to give up farms that they were on for as long as 8 generations to come to Orania. It is sad. I am a sentimental man. Things like that really is. I don't like to hear it. But I think Orania can exist, creating a reality where there's a kind of a homeland for Afrikaners, and that should not necessarily take away the right of Afrikaner farmers in the rest of South Africa. We will still help them fight for property rights, for safety on farms, for their right to farm there and keep their farms. We still embrace those things. We think it's very important that Afrikaners have the right to keep their farms. We will oppose expropriation without compensation. But we're also saying demographically we need a space that's truly ours for whatever instance, for a future, for an emergency, to have a place of home. So I think it's two realities that can exist simultaneously, where Afrikaners own farms around South Africa and it's protected, should be protected, and if they choose, or if people choose to integrate into the new South Africa, a choice that some Afrikaners made. It's more important for them to, support the national sports teams and feel like they're part of a rainbow nation or whatever. And they would not prefer Orania, and I grant them that right as well. I wish them well. So conservative Afrikaners should keep their right to have their farms and to stay. Liberal Afrikaners wanting to integrate should have that right, and we want our right as well to build a place.
Yeah, but then came Trump's executive order, which threw a spanner in the works.
Yeah, Jim, a spanner in the works indeed. I think that one very positive thing is the fact that Afrikaners are mentioned by name. We are acknowledged as a people. That was such a fresh breath of air for people who've been viewed as, the enemies of all that is good for so many years. Just to be recognized for who we are again, very positive. I believe that culture can only survive in an area where you are a demographic majority. You have to be able, in your own household, must echo the sentiments that you hear at school, must echo the sentiments that you hear at church, and must echo the sentiments of your employer, at least to some degree. If it's 100%, it might be a cult, but there must be some degree of at least saying the same thing. If you have to act like you like being oppressed in South Africa when you get to your employer, and your kid has to go to school and then act like he hates his own history, and then when you go to at home, you wanna, you say all kinds of bad things about the rest of South Africa. It's not a consistent way of living. Culture can't survive like that. Culture needs a space where it's true demographic majority, and there's at least some kind of religious and cultural alignment in that space. And that is why Orania is so important. That's why we don't want to live in the rest of South Africa, and that's why we don't want to live in the USA. We are we're not slapping away the hand that's extended to us. We're just saying thank you with a firm handshake, but we prefer to stay.
Why did you say, Germ, that it threw a spanner in the works? I don't understand.
Well, Joost can probably explain better than I, but if you're trying to create a concentration of Afrikaners or of a certain group of people, you don't want them scattered around the world.
And is that what the executive order encourages? I don't follow the argument.
Joost.
I think it gives another option. So there's already a lot of Afrikaners immigrating out of South Africa for economic and safety reasons. There's a lot of Afrikaners scattered around a very large country, which is South Africa. And then now there's another option of refugee status. Again, if people wish to take up that offer, I wish them well, and I won't stand in their way. But yes, in terms of concentration politics, it is obviously sad to see other Afrikaners leaving South Africa.
Yeah, but just to add to that, John, in a generation time, those Afrikaners who've immigrated will no longer be Afrikaners. They'll be American.
No, sorry, I get it. Yeah, I thought I thought you were referring to the threat of sanctions having thrown a spanner in the works. But
no, I'm talking
to the refugee
culture
thing. Yeah.
And also, yes, and just also on the idea of refugee, just think about that for a second, right?
Yeah.
Joost is talking about a nation that fought the empire, the British Empire, held them off for years. You know, the Anglo-Boer War. They fought the Zulus. They trekked around the country and they built South Africa. Now they're being offered refugee status to basically go and live in a town somewhere in America. I mean, it's just weird if you think of it that way.
Yeah.
All the more so. I mean, it hasn't been mentioned here specifically, but I'll do it. Is that the issues that we're talking about are neither here nor there when it comes to U.S. policy. It's all about South Africa's position on the genocide in Gaza. Okay, and you know that for me that's just absolutely pathetic because our honored guest here is telling us about other people that are having their human rights being violated grossly on a very regular basis, and nobody's telling that to the White House. I mean, that's the abomination of all of this. Okay, they're suffering obviously in Gaza. They're suffering obviously in South Africa, and to just kind of all roll it, ignoring one and focusing on the other, is just absurd.
I think geopolitics plays a massive role in this decision. However, I think Afrikaners, like any other people, should strategically embrace what we can, and we must decide on our own terms who are we going to associate with and how we're going to do it, and who we are going to ally with. The world is in disarray, and I think the future of diplomacy is privatized. It's not the nation state is dying. And we're seeing, it's screaming and kicking while it's dying. But the future is, and to my extent, privatized diplomacy, locally organized communities, groups, much more almost tribal than the idea of the unified nation state. So Afrikaners must be on the front end of that, and understand that our survival is dependent on our ability to, on our own accord, decide how and where we ally with who and for what reason, to what advantages, and how we take that forward. And I think, in European countries as well, where your government's doing unthinkable things. I see some of the things happening in England. It's insane. I'm seeing some of the things happening in Belgium, where political dissidents are locked up for memes and things like that. Is very concerning. So I think people should reorganize themselves and rethink their involvement in the nation states, the power that the nation state as a projected unity holds over them. And I think, one of my friends always say, if Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires, South Africa is the laboratorium of empires. So we are here in a lab. We're doing I hate to call something that I believe is Afrikaners' future here in Orania. I hate to call it an experiment. It's so much more than that. It's a physical place where people are connected to soil and to home. But it is to an extent also an experiment. Can communities like Orania mobilize demographically, focus on a space, develop that, and on own terms build relations forward?
Yeah, in my previous answer, I caught myself by not saying experiment because I didn't know how you would react to it. So I'm glad you kind of cleared that. Jerm, you said something. You said it with demonstratively, and I want to kind of interrogate it. You said when an Afrikaner emigrates, they're no longer in one generation. It's gone. That's a very interesting comment because that's not usually the norm in the world. I mean, if you look at the Chinese diaspora, they're always Chinese to some extent. Okay,
yes, but
it can be very positive. The culture. Okay, I'm not talking about politics per se. But what about the Afrikaner diaspora, or is that a misnomer? It doesn't exist?
I can answer that fairly easily by saying the word Afrikaner is very, very layered, and it's very connected to geography. I mean, the word itself is already a hint. If in a generation's time an Afrikaner family that immigrated to the United States or wherever has children, those kids will speak with an American accent. They probably won't speak Afrikaans unless the parents teach it to them, but they will also be disconnected from the actual geography, which is essentially connected to being an Afrikaner, which is here in Southern Africa. You can't be an Afrikaner in the full cultural extent anywhere else, because as Joost said, there's no majority there. So it becomes a very kind of diluted version of Afrikanerdom, particularly if it's just split up all over the world, and then that concentration just doesn't happen anymore. And then what is an Afrikaner after that?
It is a fascinating experiment, and indeed perhaps it's obviously not a coincidence that it's precisely the Afrikaners trying it. As we've been talking, I've suddenly been reminded of a book which came out between 5 and 10 years ago by a Catholic American writer, Rod Dreher, The Benedict Option.
Yes.
And in that book, he advocated for Catholics, I suppose mainly in the United States, but perhaps also in Europe, to, as it were, withdraw from society and create communities, of their own kind. But that's what you're actually doing. You've done it. I mean, you've bought the land, you're building the houses, you're working the land or whatever it is, making agriculture. And as far as I know, Rod Dreher's proposals have not been taken up to any major extent anywhere, either in North America or in Europe.
Yeah, but John, but it's interesting because I'm fascinated by the Benedict option because I actually practice it in my own way. A lot of Western culture, I just shut it out. I refuse to participate in it. It's sometimes I don't get a cultural reference, and I mean I feel a little bad, but. The Benedict option is also a way of thinking about the world, and I think there's something to it. And I think our guest here, you guys are practicing it.
I'm not an Afrikaner, just so that we're clear. My wife is, and so here in South Africa, you see, this is also where I think Trump might have been slightly misinformed. I'm not entirely certain why he specifically.
Not the first time.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why he said Afrikaner specifically. Does he think all white South Africans are Afrikaners? I don't know. My wife's an Afrikaner, but I'm not. But
stop being jealous, Jim.
I'm 50% there. But there are, interestingly enough, parallels internationally. I think, Joost, would you agree? South Tyrol, in where's it? Italy is a similar example, but further down the line.
Well, they didn't really. Sorry to interrupt, but they didn't really create South Tyrol. I mean, they were just taken over, and so they found themselves, as it were, in a country that they didn't belong to.
Important argument.
You have to be slightly careful. I suppose the analogy in that case does hold, because they are South Tyrol is majority Italian. That's why Italy got it. And yes, we all feel sympathy for the beleaguered Austrians who are now there, but the area is in fact traditionally Italian, much as in Transylvania, for example, although the Hungarians still regret the loss of Transylvania, that land has also been majority Romanian for a very long time. Anyway,
what about the area in Spain? What's it?
Which
Catalonia.
Well, again,
coming back, all of these examples are coming back to demographics. It shows the importance of being a majority. If you're not a majority, it's very tough to claim something for your own. But I also want to refer back to Peter's comment about Afrikaners and diaspora, and you referred to the Chinese and maybe some other ethnicities as well. Remember, if you have a strong state and you're in diaspora around the world, there's something totally different than having no state, no place, no home, where there is a majority of your people, and then you are in diaspora. So it's very, very hard to survive in diaspora without the central state. That's the first thing. Then referring to the Benedict option, I just want to say something in regards to building from the ground up and choosing in what you participate in. Many of the choices of participation, very few people are strong enough to make that choice and stick with it. There's always default choices. For example, a default choice for Afrikaans kids would be to go to Afrikaans schools. That is becoming less and less of an option. Or to go to Afrikaans universities, less and less of an option, where actually Afrikaans is pushed out. 30 years ago, you wouldn't even think about that would just be a default option to go to Afrikaans school, then Afrikaans university. And there's a matter of empowerment in not having to make the choice. You have to go away from your default option to go study in English or Mandarin or whatever, because your default option would be your own language. So many choices we don't make, cognitively thinking about it. It's just default option. Now the default option in South Africa is to study in English. In the US, it will just be a default option to go to school, university, and so on in another language. So that's also, you can choose to an extent what you consume, but it's mostly on an individual level, while collectively people go to the majority. And that's yet again goes back to demographics, the importance of demographics. You must be a majority in your own area to set certain default options out for your people.
How would you define your project, your experiment? How do you define success and when?
Yeah,
it's always a tough question to define.
Okay, or you could just say to be determined. I can go there.
Well, I can refer back to, my father always said the day that we can walk through the entirety of Orania and there's no thorns, you can walk barefoot through the entire town, we would know we were successful. Starting in the pioneer years when it was rough and tough out here. That's a measure of success. So a possible measure of success, and one to seem to attract the attention of the world, is service delivery. The ability to, while tax money is flowing out of Orania, still deliver services while rolling blackouts is the norm in South Africa. It was stage 6 just now, meaning that, I don't know, up to maybe 8 or 10 hours per day without electricity. Orania's electricity did not go off. So this, and then safety is another measure. So those are measures of success, and definitely very visible measures of success. However, to my personal concern and to many other people, identity is a much more important marker. I think if all the kids in Orania, because we are growing, people comes from other places and they need to learn Orania, and they need to relearn their history because they're denied it in the rest of South Africa. So I think an important marker would be, for me personally, if Afrikaners can reclaim their identity here, if people can come here and relearn who they are, relearn our history, and in that comes to the correct conclusion about their future. When people are all striving to freedom rather than fair rulers and comfortable life. Those would be, it's more abstract, but would be my personal measures of success. Service delivery and so on are very nice, safety very nice, building our own institutions very nice, but the test is always identity, freedom, and religion.
Peter, I've got friends who emigrated many, many years ago to different parts of the world, and one particular friend, wife and child, immigrated to Canada over a decade ago. They are trying to come back now because they have not assimilated into Canadian culture. The wife's Afrikaans, and she just said, you know what, these are not my people. I can't connect. I miss the the soil, I miss the land, and I miss the people and the culture. It's precisely what Joost is talking about. It's the identity that's very intricately linked to the geography.
Joost, you may not. You obviously, I have an American accent. I was born in America, but I'm also a Russian citizen, and I live in Moscow. And Germ, I just want to confirm what you said. Quite a few over the quarter century that I've lived here. We have what's called repats. A lot of people coming back from the U.S., coming back from Canada, coming back from particularly the U.K., which they think is a lunatic asylum right now. You know, they thought the Soviet Union was probably not a great place to live. The UK is worse. Okay, so I'm just kind of reinforcing.
These are Russians coming back, Peter.
These are Russians coming back to their own country.
Yeah.
I mean, Canada, though. Who wants to live in Canada, of all places?
Well, it'll be part of the United States pretty soon. So,
but Joost, how does Orania? Peter asked you about success. How can it expand? I understand. You said at the beginning that you bought the territory, so there must be an association or some kind of legal structure that bought the territory, and then it presumably sells. What does it sell? Plots of land to individual people who want to buy houses, and maybe to agricultural land as well. Is that how it works? And if so, how can you get bigger? Can you buy the land around you?
Well, short answer is yes. Orania's setup is quite complicated, because we don't have one body who just bought everything and is reselling it. What we have is the town was bought, the ghost town, and started there. And then farmland was bought in a new entity. So what happened is, it's complicated to explain, but the easiest way is a mini federation started developing. There's different land-owning entities under the umbrella of the Greater Orania. And there are different, I almost want to say different rules, but definitely different taxes and levies in the different areas. In some, more kind of the freedom to do your own thing without, or very, very little municipal taxes. But you have to deliver all your own services, more farm orientated. In other areas, more urban orientated, where you pay a bit more taxes, but you could get good services. And all of it's under the umbrella of the bigger Orania political idea and so on. So what happened was that naturally individuals would buy farms next to Orania, specifically Karoo land, which is, like empty, waterless areas, and they would voluntarily add it to Orania, and then form their own. It's almost like tribes, if it can use primitive language to that extent. And they would add it to Orania. They would agree with our constitution, our right to residency, our safety and security structures, our legal internal tribunals, and so on. So they're legally part of the bigger Orania. And I think that's one way of expanding through voluntary people connecting to us. We are now entering, our focus for a while was keep the land that we have and develop infrastructure. We're now again entering a phase of buying more land, connecting to the Orania area. So that's one of the ways it could grow. Another way it could grow, if we get international and local recognition of a greater space. Back in the 90s, the parliament of Nelson Mandela, actually, his parliament said the pursuit for Afrikaner self-determination in this part of the country is a legitimate pursuit. So they even acknowledged it. There's even the Afrikaner Court on self-determination, which the government signed, but there was no de facto action taken to kind of claim it. And that makes it very tough. Yet again, you can't claim something if you're not a demographic majority in that area. So Orania, rather than having the area and just filling it, we have a core and we want to expand from it. So buying land could be one way, recognition could be another. People in that area willingly accepting the Orania model could be another. So there are options.
There's an interesting backstory here.
What you said about arbitration and constitution, you hadn't mentioned that until now, Joost. So you have like your own, essentially, legal system and political system.
Yes, we vote for our own representatives. There's no political party representation inside Orania's local governments. So we do not vote for political parties, but much rather for individuals, independent individuals. And you will be held accountable as an individual, not as a party, which I think is a much more natural way for us, a Boer way of doing things. Also, we have local mediation and arbitration entities where a panel of peers can make decisions, and you can lose.
This is crypto constitutionalism, isn't it? Because your local authorities, with the people who are elected, they don't have any legal status, do they, from the point of view of South Africa?
Well, they actually do. It's a bit disputed, but back in 2000, we had a settlement with the state. They wanted then Orania was about 9 years old, and they wanted to integrate us into a South African municipality. And it's a long and very interesting story, but we actually settled on the case. They wanted to force us in, but they made some legal mistakes, and we focused on that. And we had them kind of in a position where they had to choose, recognize Orania or stop the entire election that was in 2 days. And they chose to rather recognize some rights for Orania. And that's why we have our own local government. It's totally unique in South Africa. There's no other one like it. We kept voting. And as an act of good faith, we then said that we will not vote in the neighboring municipalities election. So we only vote locally there and elect our own leaders. And they don't get any salary from the state. They don't get any special privileges, but they are recognized as a local government. And obviously, as Professor Karel Boshoff, one of the founders of Orania, said, take what you can get and then work for more. So we took what we could get, and now we're working for more.
John, do you consider, in the context of South Africa, do you consider yourself a tribe?
Yes, I would prefer the word folk, but I think, some people call us the white tribe of Africa. We have no other home.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's a way to refer to us as a collective group. I don't really care much for it.
My point is that folk or tribe. I mean, its meaning is what you apply to it. Okay, I mean, objectively, you're a community of people like so many other communities in South Africa, and they call themselves tribes.
Mm-hmm. So I think. To an extent, we are maybe a tribe.
I mean, look at the European Union. It's a group of tribes. Okay. I mean, that's what I'm trying to get at here.
So I think to an extent, that's maybe what we are. However, I think it feels like it takes a bit of status away from us, reducing us to just a tribe rather than a folk.
Surely the other peoples in South Africa regard themselves as peoples, the Zulus or whatever.
There you go. That's what I'm getting at.
Tribes, yeah.
That's what I'm getting at, yeah.
So I still very much identify with the rest of the Afrikaners outside of Orania. I feel connected to them. Although I think there's a bit of a progression in Orania with own labor and certain things. I don't view Oranians better than other Afrikaners. I think we have applied towards those people, and they to us. There's a mutual connection, and that is part of a bigger folk. I don't think Orania is a folk on its own. Maybe Orania is a tribe in the bigger folk.
There you go.
It's I think it's a way to understand yourself. But we still very much are a people. We are a folk in the larger extent.
Well,
just very quickly.
Absolutely. Go on, John. And then we'll
John, just
up.
very, very quickly. I wanted to say this earlier. I don't know if you are aware of this, but in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, leading up to the creation of the new South Africa in 94, there was actually political discussion about creating an independent Afrikaner state. And that was thrown off the table, very, very sadly.
But what is so fascinating about this is that it's I don't want to, I hesitate to use the word, but it's a private initiative. It's a spontaneous coming together. I teach politics, and I teach the history of political ideas. And from the 17th century onwards, people have imagined a social contract. And what you're showing, Joost, is that social contract can actually happen, and that's absolutely fascinating.
It's an imagined community becoming a reality.
Yeah,
it's an imagined community.
Yes. Why? Because the idea movement existed before the real place.
Yeah,
the idea movement became first, and in 1988, the Orania movement in its previous form was formed, and the land was only bought later. And then, even then, there was many members to the Orania movement, but only 30 families moved here. And it took us many years to actually start sustainably growing. So yes, it's very important. The idea came first. So people were so inspired by the idea that they moved to an area with no economy, with no opportunity, with very little infrastructure, and lived very pioneerish lives to embrace this idea. And around the idea the economy came. Not around the economy came the idea, but the other way around. So that's quite important to understand that it is a voluntary association, and that's what we ask for when we ask for recognition. Give us the opportunity to decide, the freedom of association and voluntarily embrace who we are and how we want to build our community. So yes, it is from the ground up. It comes back to the Orania political model, which is de facto politics. Create de facto realities and then get recognition. It doesn't work to ask for recognition first and then try to scramble to create the reality. You must create the reality first.
Very good. Well, Joost, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for talking to us. It's been absolutely fascinating, both for me, for Jem, for Peter, and I'm sure for our viewers. Thank you again, and all the best. We wish you well.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you. It's
we
brilliant.
look forward to meeting everyone, or seeing everyone, or them seeing us anyway, at the same time next week. Bye.
Cheers.